Hello everyone, and welcome to Config. I have been dreaming and thinking and planning for this day for so long. I am so excited it's finally here. My name is Chris Beatty. I lead Figma's UX writing team. Thank you. So whether you came from across the bay like me or from around the world like so many of you did, thank you so much for being here. We are so glad to have you. So I'm a writer. Math is not my strongest suit, but I was backstage just now and I was counting the number of people in the room. And by my count, there are 7 million of us here together in this space right now, making this the best attended breakout session in human history. Give yourself a round of applause, people. You did that. So as all 7 million of us make our way around Config today, we would love to have you share your photos, your thoughts, your reflections, your musings on whatever social channel you choose. When you do so, we would also really appreciate it if you would use the hashtag Config2023 so we can all find each other more easily. If you are here with us in beautiful Moscone Center, also know that if you ever need anything, look for the volunteers wearing the blue Config t-shirts, very stylish. There's an example right over here. Yes. And if you are joining us on virtuals, there are lots of folks from Figma in the chat. Please say howdy, let us know what you need, and we'll get it for you. So, this breakout session, this history-defining breakout session. The fact that you chose to come here when there were so many other amazing sessions you could attend tells me a couple things about you. So one, it tells me that you are the wisest, most discerning, and frankly, most likable of all Config attendees. It's true, I know it, you know it. And two, it tells me that you are interested in the role that thoughtful writing and language play in human-centered design. So show of hands, how many of you work as a UX writer, a content strategist, a content designer, information? Oh my gosh, keep those hands up. Oh, looking great. Everybody who works with language is kind of part of their job. Keep those hands up. Oh, yes. OK. I could sense it. I could tell the word nerd force was strong in this room. So we're all in luck today because we have a double feature with 2 UX writers on my team here at Figma. So first up, we have Reid. So yes. So Reid has overseen language, words, structure, taxonomy, strategy for some of the most beloved of Figma's features. Reid was also the very first UX writer I hired when I was growing the team. Reid is here to share a story from a moment when great writing alone just wasn't getting them quite where they wanted to go. And they're going to give us some tips on things they learned from that moment that can help all of us pitch our own ideas more powerfully. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Reid.
Hello. My name's Ryan. I'm in the UX writing team here at Figma. And when I first started at Figma about 2 years ago, I was super excited about the opportunity, and I was so intimidated. I was joining this design team who are some of the best. They are so passionate about design that they design tools for designers. But I didn't go to design school. I didn't even study something creative. I studied finance, and my career started in tech support. So I could use Figma, but not particularly well. There was just so much about the craft that I didn't know yet. Meanwhile, content designers saw that I had started at Figma, and they started asking, like, do you think I'll need to know how to use Figma? Will I know how to, or do I need to know how to do more design work? And I didn't even know if I was going to be successful in my own role, let alone how to answer that question kind of for everyone else. Well, today I'm here to say that I still don't know. If you read the description for this talk, it was going to be much more opinionated. But as I started writing it, I realized I don't really know better than any of us what content design will look like in a couple of years. What I do know is my own personal experience, which is one that I've had more impact as a content designer by baking a little bit of design into my process. And two, that the narrow way that I was thinking about design is ultimately what was holding me back. So I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I can show you how you can have impact as a content designer by adding some design and how you can go about learning how to do it. First, I will take a quick detour to talk about how I got here at all. So rewind to 2019, I'm like 6-ish years into my content career. At each of these stops, I've just been super lucky to learn from these senior writers and these senior designers who advocated for quality and for users at every step of the product process. They had impact at the highest levels of the company. And I knew, these role models that I had, that's who I wanted to be, and that's the type of impact that I wanted to have. And at the time I was working my ass off, I was trying to prove that I could have that type of impact by burning the candle at both ends and ultimately really burning myself out. But I felt like I was speeding towards this goal of having that type of impact. And really I was speeding towards a wall. Despite having many examples of how I had impacted content across the product, I didn't have like a singular definitive example of how I impacted the overall user experience. So when it came time for promotions and I was hoping for that senior one, I didn't get it. And it wasn't for lack of trying. I had been writing up a storm, doing everything I could to prove that I could do it. I wrote these long docs packed with ideas, content strategies, user journeys. I wrote requirement docs. I ran brainstorms. But just because I was doing the most doesn't mean I was working particularly effectively. My output was high, but ultimately it didn't really matter how much I did if it kind of fell on deaf ears. So shortly after this is when I got the feedback that started my path down to my path to designing in the first place. One day I reached out to the design manager for my team after sharing the strategy doc out that just got no traction. And I just wanted some feedback, like, why did you think that happened? And she said, among many brilliant things, maybe a doc just isn't the right format for communicating your ideas. You have so many tools, but you're still really only using a pencil. Metaphorical, but in her mind, I was using the wrong tool for the job, or at least not the most effective one. She said, writing can be the most effective tool, especially if you're a writer and you know how to use words. But if you're trying to describe something particularly complex or inherently visual, or if you work in an environment like we all do, where people's attention is divided into 1,000 different channels and projects at once, maybe it's not the most effective. It can fall flat. That in those cases, it can actually help to paint a picture, to show more than tell, to design your ideas more than describe them. And at the time, I was like, well, shit, I'm not a designer. I don't know how to design. And she slacked back, why not? And I chewed on that for a while before realizing kind of the core reaction I was having. Well, design should look good, and I don't know how to make things that look good. I had this idea that design was this crisp, clean thing that didn't have any room for error, that I needed to be able to understand and implement all of those tiny visual details in order to be taken seriously as a designer. But I learned eventually I was wrong. Design should look good, eventually. That's really only important for one stage of the design process, really when you're later on, when high fidelity matters because you're about to implement something. But in that earlier 80% of the design process, the fidelity of your work doesn't really matter at all. At these stages, the goal isn't precision, but effective communication of your ideas. And that's why designing, or just to take some seriousness out of it, just visualizing your ideas can be so effective, specifically because it doesn't have to be very good. Because you don't need precise detail in order to get the gist of an idea when it's presented visually. And this is especially true when you work with creative people like us and our design partners. Because as creative people, it's our job to imagine. Visualizing ideas is effective because our teammates are experts at imagining what could be, and they can fill in the gaps that we leave, even in our shitty little doodles. So don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should trade writing for designing, because the truth is that the real magic happens when you're capable of doing both, of writing and designing, of showing and telling. The most effective writers and designers that I've worked with know how to use each other's tools. They know how to use a pencil and a brush, and ultimately how to use them together. So let's ground this in a real example, the first project where kind of this started to come to life for me. After that performance review and after that feedback, I got staffed on a project at Uber Eats to improve how we handle canceled orders. You can see the original experience is shitty. We told users like pretty much nothing. So we had a problem. People would have a horrible experience and they would delete the app. We had two big challenges here. One was that we operated in thousands of markets. And two was that there were over 30 cancellation scenarios in each of those markets. So my content design brain immediately jumped to like something modular, like different blocks of content that we could swap in and out. So I wrote up a doc for this idea, the pros and cons, the data we might need, who we need to talk to. And I dropped that into our Slack channel. It looks something like this. This was like maybe a quarter of what I wrote. It was like a wall of text, but I was struggling to trim this down in a way that still kind of held all of the meaning that I wanted it to. But I was like, this is obvious. They'll read it. They'll understand what I'm saying. They did not. No one opened the doc. No one responded to my message. No one reacted, like with a smiley, which takes 2 seconds. and I don't blame my teammates. We've all opened a Slack channel, seen like a wall of text, and been like, absolutely not. But this was that moment. I had so much conviction around that idea. I remembered this feedback, and I was, as much as I didn't want to do this, I was like, all right, maybe I'll try something different. So I went back to the drawing board. I picked up a notebook and a pen, and I doodled for a while. And after throwing away half of that notebook, I landed on a set of ideas that I didn't completely hate. Obviously, these are not particularly good. My handwriting looks like I'm a 5-year-old. But they were like close to kind of what I was imagining. And I figured this was in the realm of something that I could share with my team. I did want to clean it up before sharing, because it's kind of hard to interpret what any of this means. So I opened the tool that I knew how to use confidently at the time, which was Google Slides. And I cleaned it up just using really basic rectangles and text. Like, nothing here is fancy. You can do this in Google Slides. This wasn't perfect. I was still going to have to voice over some of it. Like, I still needed that doc. But it was something, and it wasn't a wall of text. So I dropped this back into our Slack channel and tagged our designer. And pretty quickly, he was like, oh, okay, I get what you're saying. And after a minute, he came back with this. He had taken my idea very quickly and just cleaned it up in Figma, just put it within the context of our mobile design system to make it feel a little bit more legit. And it was this that our PM reacted to, and he was like, okay, I like where this is going. Can you guys take this a little bit higher fidelity so I can start shopping this around? So just in a few minutes, we went from no momentum to like all of it, and we were off and running. Just that rough mock was enough for the designer and I to start jamming on some content and design principles. We took this through Crit. We ended up adding some example content and taking it slightly higher fidelity. And then our PM took these through product review to start to get buy-in from leadership, to start scoping it out with engineering. And while all of this was happening, our illustrator had enough to start coming up with creative directions for this page, which we knew was going to be important for setting the tone, and using our principles to come up with some of her own. So at the end of it all, we ultimately landed on something that was pretty similar to what I had envisioned, which was this modular system that we could easily experiment with and adapt to each market and scenario. These two things essentially describe the same idea and tell the same story, but it was kind of the pair of them that ultimately told a stronger one. And obviously, this project was much more complicated, and I was one small piece of 70 people who worked on it. But it just shows how you can have an impact earlier on and affect the overall UX of a product, even if it's a really, really rough, small idea at the very beginning. So ultimately, this was just one project, but it was the first time I had kind of proved to myself that this was something that I was capable of. And after doing that on a couple of more projects, I jumped to the senior level at Eats, and then jumped to the team here at Figma. I'll talk through how I got to that point to now, but there are a couple other parts of the design process where I find this particularly useful. So the Eats example was earlier on. It was lower fidelity, where that more simple design is more effective. What about the higher fidelity end? I'll be honest, you'll be more effective if you can use Figma to design at a higher fidelity later in the process. But that doesn't mean that you can't have any impact at all. So last year, we launched a bunch of text editing improvements, including something called vertical trim. Basically, it just lets you chop the top and bottom of a text layer off to make it easier to align to other objects. The designer later in the process came to me, and he's like, we need to name this thing. And he was kind of already on to the naming challenge at hand. The original term for this thing is letting trim. It's a heteronym. It looks like leading. It's not how you say it. So we knew this was going to be a challenge to kind of use the term that power users knew while also making it easy enough for average users to understand. So I jumped into FigJam, where I do a lot of my doodling now. If you can't read this, it's fine. I can't either. But long story short, we landed on the name vertical trim after much discussion. But it wasn't perfect after all of that discussion. And my spidey sense kind of goes off whenever words aren't solving a design problem. So I knew there was something better here. So I took a step back and I was like, we have all of these complicated text concepts. Like, we must have solved this already somehow. And realized pretty quickly that we do so visually. Like, alignment looks like lines, decoration, underline, look, you get what I'm saying. So I went back to doodling again and landed on something like this. This took me a long time. This was not like just really quick on a napkin. And basically just 2 buttons that show the difference between trim between the settings. So I could have stopped here. This is super low fidelity, and even though it's later in the process, like it roughly communicates the idea well enough. In this case, I took it just the extra step. I polished it up in Figma using an icon that we already had, added some lines, and I sent this over to the designer. And ultimately, he was like, cool, we shipped it a few days later. But the point is, the difference between low and high fidelity even later in the process isn't that big. Like, in either case, if I had stopped with the doodle and given that to my designer, he would have understood what I was saying. The only big difference is that by giving him a slightly higher fidelity idea, he could take it, clean it up, and send it off in like minutes versus having to design it from scratch. But in terms of your impact as a content designer, like the difference is pretty negligible and the doodling is easier. What about projects that are mostly content with very little design? I feel like that's like half of what we work on. It turns out that same 80-20 split applies here. Just think about strategy as low fidelity and actually writing the strings as higher fidelity. Even on content-heavy projects, it can help to visualize those ideas. Earlier this year, we shipped push notifications for the Figma mobile app. I got looped in after the team had kind of already picked the push notifications that we wanted, and they wrote some example copy for me, which saved me a ton of time. But as I jumped in, I found that we hadn't really aligned on some really basic content decisions yet, like what information did we want in the header? Did we need to use real name or usernames? Like all of these things that you tend to decide before actually writing the strings. So essentially, we had started here, kind of at high fidelity writing, and we really skipped over that lower fidelity strategy bit. So I wanted to pull it back. And we could have done this in the paper doc, but it's kind of hard to format things abstractly in a paper doc. It's super linear, it's very rigid. So instead, I just pulled it out into FigJam and stripped away all of the details, like the actual strings and the words, that can kind of be distracting when you have a conversation about like those more fundamental content decisions. And then I polished it up in Figma at a higher fidelity. But the point is, it can actually help to lower the fidelity of your content work by visualizing it and so you can have a conversation about those more fundamental bits without tripping over like specific word choices that aren't that important. And then finally, one of the best times to practice this is when there is basically no process at all. It's just you and the designer, and maybe you're adding something tiny to your product. I feel like that happens a lot. So last summer, we launched something called stamp attribution in FigJam. It basically lets you hover over a stamp to see who left it there. But we couldn't backfill this data. So for some amount of time, we were going to have stamps that we couldn't attribute to anyone. And we needed a string for that. So this is like, it's such a small thing, and it was going to be temporary, because eventually we would get rid of it. So I wanted to have some fun with it. I started riffing on different ideas. I started gravitating towards this like time direction that I liked, like the before times. And I almost handed this off, but I kept looking at this little circle and the little avatar and like lost to time. And I was like, what does this remind me of? And realized it was Jurassic Park. And we shipped the prehistoric stamp. So obviously, this is not the most impactful thing I've done at Figma. But it just, like, when you have the chance and it's super low stakes to have some fun, it's like the perfect time to design something with your own hands. Like, the designer was just like, cool, great, and we shipped it. So when it's low stakes, it's just the perfect time. You should lean in. OK, so you can have more impact as a content designer if you add some design to your process. But how do you go about doing that? I'll be honest, there is no secret, magical way to do this or to skip over kind of how long it takes. It takes practice, it takes time, and consistency. But over the past 2 years, I've picked up a couple of tips 5 of them, that have kind of greased this process for me. It's made it a little bit easier to do. 1 or 2 of them, maybe all 5, you'll be like, yeah, this is obvious. But honestly, that's a good thing. If they feel obvious, it means you're capable of doing them yourself. So let's dive in. Number 1 is just ask your team. The number 1 question that I get from content designers is how to go about learning how to use Figma. Like, what courses do I take? What website? And my answer is always the same, because it's exactly what I did, and it's just ask your team for help. You work with professional designers all day who are nerds and only want to talk about design. Use them. When I first started at Figma, my design chops weren't great. But as I worked on projects, I would ask them, like, why did you use this button over that one? Why did you use a bottom sheet instead of a modal? To start picking up on some of those smaller design nuances. I would trade writing tips for design ones. I taught them like how we write subject lines, and they taught me how to use auto layout. Everyone assumes you have to take a course or practice outside of work to learn how to use Figma, but work is the perfect environment for you to learn how to do it, because the best way to learn is by doing, and you already spend your entire day doing. This is a case of working smarter, not harder. The smartest way to learn how to do this is to spend the 40 hours you already dedicate to thinking about design. The second is get it out. When you have ideas, it is your job to get them out of your brain and onto paper. Just use those moments of inspiration as a chance to practice, or at least write them down so you can get to them later. And it's critical that you do, because ultimately, whether you're a writer or a designer, it's your ideas that determine your impact. If you never materialize the ideas, you're going to have very, very little impact. If you can make a habit of, when you think of these ideas, of getting them out of your head and onto paper, the rest of this will follow. Number 3 is just be bad at it. I think this is probably the hardest one for people who are experts of something already, like all of you. But just like you weren't a very good writer at one point, you kind of have to start by being a not very good designer. To start, just doodle for yourself, like in the privacy of your own file, in a notebook when you're working from home alone, just wherever and whatever you have to do to practice until you're comfortable. But just keep in mind that the difference between a bad doodle and something that's good enough to share with your team is really, really small, because ultimately you really only need to communicate the spirit of your idea and not the blueprint. Like I said earlier, your teammates are experts at imagining what could be, so even your bad doodle will be good enough to communicate the idea. Number 4 is just be wrong. The best ideas come from collaboration, and nothing gets collaboration going faster than showing people something that they really don't like. I'm not saying be wrong on purpose, that's trolling. But I'm just saying you shouldn't worry about it, because ultimately even wrong ideas nudge your team towards the right ones. When you share an idea and someone says, I don't know about this, it's the perfect chance to ask, why not? Like, what are you imagining? What else would you do? The point is just get comfortable with being wrong and sharing ideas even if they might not be right, because sharing any idea is still more productive than not sharing at all. And finally, number 5, when you're ready to try designing at a higher fidelity in Figma, use what exists. Don't reinvent the wheel or any other shape. There are plenty of things out there that people have already made that you can use. Your team has a design system. Ask them where to find it and how to use it. And the Figma community has published thousands of component libraries, wireframing kits, UI kits, templates. You don't have to make anything yourself. Just find the pieces that you need and roughly arrange them in a way that communicates your idea. And I know that doesn't sound like high fidelity design, but high fidelity just means realistic, not precise. It's about using real UI elements at all, not about using them perfectly. Your designer can sweat the details, you just need to communicate your idea. Now, clearly I know what I'm doing. I have mastered the art of doing this. I have not. The reality is that I'm still learning too. All of this is just stuff that I've learned so far. And I know that I personally still have a ways to go to be as effective and as impactful as I'd like to be. Even just the other day, Sarah, the DM for our team, who's sitting right there, had to remind all of us to stop talking about our ideas in Slack and actually go make something. Which is to say that myself and even the designers on my team still struggle to make this a habit. And it's okay if it takes a long time for that to feel comfortable for you too. I don't know what content design will look like in the future, but I'm also not sure it totally matters. You're in the perfect position in your current role to have impact, to have more impact on the projects that you're working on right now. And you're around all of the people and the resources you need to learn how to do it. It's easier than it seems, and you're not alone. Between your design partners who are happy to help and the rest of us, content designers who are learning right there along with you, you're in good company. don't overthink it. Just start designing. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Another round of applause for Reid. That was so good, so helpful. All right, next up in our writing double feature, we have Andrew Schmidt. So Schmidt was the very first writer on our online whiteboard, FigJam. Those of you FigJam users out there? Yeah, okay. So the voice of FigJam is like instantly recognizable, right? In so many ways, that is Schmidt's voice. That kind of warm, playful, conversational voice is Schmidt, and he is now kind of part of the product DNA of FigJam. So in Schmidt's talk, Schmidt is going to bravely take on the confetti industrial complex, yes, that's right, and change the way we think about delightful software forever. Please put your hands together for Schmidt.
Hi. Yeah, I'm Andrew Schmidt. I'm a UX writer here, and I am sick of all the confetti. Pew, pew. No, seriously. I am sick of it. The thing is about confetti, pew. Is that it? Okay. We're living in a time of try-hard software. Every product is trying poorly, misguidedly, kind of miserably to delight us. Like electric cars that make fart noises. Or enterprise chat software that tells jokes. Or even equity management software with, yes, confetti. And I'm part of the problem, too. I wasn't sure where I'd be standing. Me. I'm part of the problem. I mean, I put a lot of those error messages in Slack. I put silly placeholder text in search fields. I gave cute names to font sizes. I even hid a Carly Rae Jepsen reference in FigJam somewhere. And nobody's found it yet, by the way. I'm starting to feel like you're not even looking. She's in there. My point is this. Delight is a dangerous word. And we have this very narrow, naive definition of it. We've taken the word delight, which it's a human reaction. It should contain multitudes. We've taken it and we have pulverized it. We've stomped it into the ground, reduced it to a little nubbin of what it once was, a little nubbin that we use to sell enterprise software and electric cars. It is my belief that we are living in the last, final, and dying days of delightful software. Because it's time to draw a line, to say enough. No more jokes, no more Easter eggs, and no more confetti. And the question is, what do we do instead? Like, I've been putting little Easter eggs in software for so long that I've kind of forgotten what else is good. Like, what else makes for good software? This is the question I want to answer today. And I want to do it by traveling in time. So, I'd like to invite you to rabbit hole with me. We're going to go back in time. We're going to check out some of the products that really left a mark on me, that changed me, that I remember. And we're going to try to figure out what was good about them. And we don't even have to travel very far for our first stop. Our first stop is just this morning when I was using my kettle, the Fellow Stag EKG Electric Kettle TM. I love this kettle. What I love about it is the interface. It is dead simple. You press the dial to turn it on. You turn the dial to set the temperature. You wait, and then you pour. Smells good, right? And that's it. You're done. But okay, so what, right? Like, I am not convinced that simplicity is good just in and of itself. Sometimes good things are complicated. I love photography. Photography and cameras are complicated. I love music. Synthesizers are complicated. Relationships can be good but complicated. My morning routine is complicated. It has so many steps and in such a specific order. Like, I turn on my shower before I brush my teeth. That way, the water in the sink warms up faster, so when I finish brushing and I go to rinse, the water isn't so cold that it hurts my teeth. I have sensitive teeth. My morning routine is a machine. It keeps going. I set my water to boil before I go get dressed because I'm running late. I'm always running late. And then I grind my coffee beans and then leave the coffee to steep while I go put stuff in my hair because I am running late. My morning routine is a production. And this is why it's nice that that kettle is so simple. If it took any more steps, if it were like 6 steps instead of 1, if I could set the altitude or a timer or the brew method, it would throw everything out of whack. It'd take up too much space. Instead, it doesn't. My kettle fits right in. It's not really that it's simple, it's that it's considerate. It occupies no more of my morning routine, no more space in my brain, no more space in my life than it needs to do its job well. And so I think this is our first answer. Good software is considerate. And now we tumble backwards further and further in time. We're going to go all the way back to a phone OS that I love. I know you all know and love this phone OS. That's right. WebOS for the Palm Pre. I love WebOS. They got multitasking so right. Apps launch as cards. You swipe up to get out of them. You swipe back and forth to go through. You can even actually stack them to keep related stuff close together, which is nifty. And of course, you swipe up to close. Sounds familiar, right? I mean, this is how your phone works today. This is how the iPhone's been doing it since 2013. That's when iOS 7 came out. That's when they switched from their old multitasking UI, which was like the little tray of icons on linen, and the whole screen is like, it's very disorienting. They switched from that to cards that you swipe through, and you flick up to close. Well, WebOS has been doing this since 2009. What was the iPhone doing in 2009? I will tell you, it was adding copy and paste. But so what, right? Like, who cares about being first? What's interesting to me is, how did WebOS get this so right? Like, why did everyone copy it? And I think the answer has to do with degrees of separation. So picture this. You're using a desktop computer. You're moving the mouse. The mouse is moving a cursor. The cursors are interacting with software over here. You were like several degrees removed from the software. But then touchscreens changed all of that. Like, it feels like you are just touching the virtual software. You are pressing the virtual buttons. You're swiping through virtual pages. It feels very direct. And if it's software that you can touch, then the software needs to be physical. It needs to obey the rules of things we can touch. It needs to be tangible and tactile. And I think that's what WebOS did for multitasking. It made apps physical things that we can maneuver and toss away. I think that's another thing that good software can be. Good software is tactile. Let's keep cruising. Back to the year 2004, I'm in high school, and I'm about to discover a piece of software that will literally change the course of my life, Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro was a revelation. It's the timeline for me. You drag and drop clips to rearrange them. You can pull them to lengthen or shorten them. You can even cut them with a click. This is incredible. And you're thinking, okay, what's the big deal? Well, the big deal is my editing suite before Final Cut Pro was this. It was a camcorder connected to a VCR. I would find the clip I wanted on the camcorder. I'd press play. I'd press record really quick. Then I would wait, and then I'd press stop to cut. Then I'd find the next clip, rewrite and format. Okay, play and record, stop. It took forever. And also, I couldn't really go back. Like, you could rewind and try again, but it injected a little bit of static. It was rough. Compared to that, Final Cut Pro, it changed everything. It changed what was possible for my friends and I. We went from making silly little, like, short skits to making half-hour-long westerns. Set under the sun, the hot sun of high noon in Michigan Dune State Park. I don't know. These are my friends. They're getting ready. The outlaw is about to charge. We cut to his eye. His eye narrows. Our heroes brace themselves. He charges. We're not going to watch all of this. It's half an hour. My point is, it wasn't just that Final Cut Pro was better. It was empowering. It changed what was possible for my friends and I. Because of Final Cut Pro, I went to film school. I had a whole other career. This is another thing I think good software should be. Good software is empowering. Let's go further. Let's go back to a darker time, a time before I'd ever touched a Macintosh, my Windows era, and a piece of software that you do not love, but I do, Word 97. For me, Word 97 is pure nostalgia, okay? This is where I started to write. I guess really I would write short stories. I'd sit on a chair outside my parents' room. I'd write short stories on pieces of paper. And then I would hand them to my mother to edit. And then she would edit them. And then the next day I would go type them up here in Word 97. And it felt so real. It felt so official. It felt published, you know? Okay, but so what? Like, who cares about nostalgia? We can't inject childhood memories for our users into our software. So what else is Word? What else is Word? I mean, it's ugly, but it's ugly in a really specific way. Like, there are all these buttons across the top, and they're kind of an eyesore. But it is kind of nice that they're easy to find. They're always there. They're never, like, scrolling away or hiding or being tucked into menus. They're always there. And over time, you start to build up muscle memory for them. And it starts to feel, it goes from being ugly to being comfortable. I think I like that. It's not minimal, it's not beautiful, for sure, but it is comfy. I think that's something else software can be. Good software is comfy. Okay, we have one more stop. We're going back even further. The year is 1967. Mainframes take up entire rooms, and an OS has just been released that I think is kind of a tipping point. It's called TOPS 10. Released for the PDP 10, the DEC 10. This is before my time, just to be clear. TOPS 10 is interesting to me. It only has 92 things you can do with it in the whole OS. 92 verbs, that's it. That's all. This is all of them. It's just your blinking cursor and a set of verbs. So it's limited. But something weird happened with TOPS 10. Like, creative hacker types, they went wild. They built so many firsts here. Deck War, the first multiplayer computer game for TOPS 10. Mud 1, multi-user dungeon. It was the beginning of MMOs. Advent, which is better known as Adventure, Colossal Cave Adventure. It was called Advent because file names could only be 6 characters long. And even Forum, the first chat room, but they called it a CB simulator. They didn't have a concept of chat rooms, so they were like, it's like CB radio, sort of, but just text. I think that's interesting. It feels to me like TOPS 10 was at this interesting tipping point in history. Before it, computers were sort of calculators. They were for launching rockets and for solving math problems. And then after it, computers became what they are today. They became worlds that we kind of go into. We use to connect with people and share stuff and learn about the world and make videos. And TOPS 10 is right there in the middle at this tipping point. And the question to me is why? I think the answer actually has to do with those verbs. I think there's some Goldilocks thing going on here. TOPS 10 had lots of potential. You could do so many things with it. But it also had just the right amount of constraints. And I think we know it. The thing about constraints is that they can inspire us. This is something else I think good software should be. Inspiring. Okay, see? You don't need delight. None of those products had jokes. None of those products had Easter eggs. None of those products had confetti. Good software is this. That's it, and that's all. That's sort of the talk, but I thought there'd be something cool to do, kind of. I thought it'd be cool to actually demo for you TOPS 10. So there's a museum in Seattle called the Living Computers Museum, and it's like Paul Allen founded it. There's actually a bunch of computers that are kept running, old mainframe computers, and they're connected to the internet, and you can SSH into them and use them. If this works. So yeah, TOPS 10, okay. I'm not going to tell you my password, sorry. So now we're in. So one of the verbs in TOPS 10 is make. You can make anything. We could make a to-do list. This is just my normal to-do list. Control-C to close. We made a to-do list. We can make anything. We could make a novel. There's a lot of lag. Here's our opening line, Vonnegut. Top 10, it's beautiful. I love that it's just you and your imagination. Like, we can make anything. We can make whatever we want. We could make worlds. We could make change. We could, what should we make? What should we make? We can make love. I don't see why not. Not war. Make love, not war. That's funny. It was very very computer of the 60s. It's very, that's an Easter egg. You know what? Forget Top 10. You know what was good? You know what was really good and no nonsense? Word 97, no nonsense, does what it says on the tin. Word 97. What?
Type blue.
I was afraid of this. I'll type blue. You know what? I will even make this blue. I will make it blue, and I will make it bold, and I will add a space, and I will click here, and I'll control click here, and that's how you get Word 97 pinball, which I'm not good at. Fast forward, forget Word. You know what's good about Final Cut Pro? It's right in the name. It's for professionals. This is a serious piece of software. It's empowering. It lets you make new things you didn't think were possible. And if you leave your mouse cursor still too long, a yak shows up. His name is Bruce. That's not a joke. He mostly wants to eat this grass on your timeline, but he will also talk later. Final Cut Pro is dead to me. You know what was good? You know what was really good? WebOS. And while I was shooting this video, I got an email from Ginny. The email subject line was super cow powers. I thought that was weird. I tapped in. It's like cow confetti. WebOS is also dead to me. You know what's good? You know what's good about kettles? They aren't software. They aren't hardware. They're kitchenware. They do what you expect. They fit into your routine, all right? This is how you make, this is, did that say wormy? Did they put snake in a kettle? Oh my God. Okay, this is where the part where if I had time. Can I be honest with you all? I was lying at the beginning. I said that I did this talk because the electric cars are making fart noises, and I don't like that. But the thing is, this is a second career for me. I think it's true for a lot of UX writers. And because of that, I've always felt like I had to try really hard to prove that I should be here. I remember the first design conference I ever went to. It was in Stockholm. This is years ago. It was my first design conference, my first time in Europe, actually. And I just wanted to impress people. And I knew I could. I knew I could because I had this ace up my sleeve. I worked at a hot upcoming startup. And if I just told people that, I knew they'll be impressed and they'll like me. So the first night I met a designer at the hotel bar, a Swedish designer, and he said, "What do you do?" I told him, "Oh, I work here, and I'm a writer on the design team." And we got past that. And then he said, "What's something you've made that you're proud of?" And it was so direct, but such a big question, that I kind of drew a blank. And I was like, well, I know. I made these silly error messages that pop up in Slack. If you click too many reactions, it gives you an error message. All the writers chipped in. We made a bunch of them. And they make you laugh. And he said, "I hate that." I hate that. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "I want the tools I use for work to just let me do my work and be really good at it and then get out of the way." And there is something to that. There's something to that. I think ever since then I worried, was my career cheap? Wormy, man. Wormy. Okay, let's finish this thing. No matter how far back in time you go, from smart kettles to smartphones to mainframes the size of entire rooms, no matter how far back you go in the history of computing, the humanity shines through. There are people making these things. And yes, they want to make good things. They want to make things that are considerate and tactile and yada yada, but also they want you to know that they were there. Because they're like you and me. They have fears. I'm afraid of dying, but more than that, I'm afraid of being forgotten. I think we're all afraid of being forgotten. That's why we put bison on cave walls. That's why we put yaks in Final Cut Pro. That's why we sign our work. Good software is these things, yes, but also good software, despite everything, despite our best efforts, it lets the humanity shine through. And maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay to put Wormy in the kettle or Carly in FigJam. Maybe it's okay. Yeah, so I think this is a good list. I like this list. I've always wanted to make a manifesto, like not one other people have to follow, just like one for me, a personal manifesto. This could be it. The problem is actually like right there at the top. Good software is. It's kind of a weak phrase, good software. What else could we do here? Good design is that taken? Yeah. You all know where this is going, don't you? Fine. Delightful software is considerate. Delightful software is tactile. Delightful software empowers us. Delightful software is comfy. And delightful software inspires us. And maybe, if you're doing all those things already, maybe it's okay that delightful software lets the humanity shine through. Thank you.